Oxford Handbook of Computer Music says that mechanical instruments are important predecessors of modern computer music. Across mechanical music and musicology communities, this idea pops up again and again. On a 2014 YouTube video of an old barrel organ, one user commented that it was the godfather of Fruity Loops. But how far do these connections go? And does it even make sense to talk about connections between old mechanical and newer digital systems? Early computers are sometimes said to share some basic principles with other machines, including a punched card-reading automated weaving machine called the Jacquard loom, as well as aspects of mechanical music programming that might be described as digital. But is it a bit of a stretch to back-project the idea of the digital onto mechanical music? First of all, we need to decide what digital is going to mean here. There are lots of ways people describe the distinction between the digital and its common counterpart, the analog. Daniel Hillis gives a computer engineer's perspective on the matter, describing analog signals as being a bit like a kitchen tap or faucet. An analog signal can be off, a little bit on, a bit more on, and so on. There are degrees of strength to the signal. A digital signal can either be on or off. Digital signals use what is called restoring logic, meaning that even a very weak input will produce a strong, that is, an on, output. This is very useful for maintaining signal integrity while transmitting across complex structures, but in terms of music, actually we tend to quite like certain kinds of irregularities. Digital and analog can be understood as having absolute or more relative relationships to the states of on and off. They respectively erase or preserve irregularities. In everyday, non-engineering discourse around computers, it's quite common to encounter the idea that computers work according to a binary system of layers of on and off signals. We may know that computers at a base level use binary code, and we may also know that a byte of binary data with 8 digits reading either 1 or 0 corresponds in physical terms to a series of microtransistors. A 1 indicates a transistor that is on, and a 0 indicates a transistor that is off. So far, so binary, and this does map onto the way that a barrel organ works in some ways. The organ itself has a set of transistors in the form of pipes or keys, and the binary data on the organ barrel correlates to these transistors being in one of 2 possible states at a given time. But computers don't just turn lights on and off. A barrel organ is a doing machine. It executes its basic program in one literal step. X is on now, Y is on after that. And the output of this is the end goal. The input is expressed in sound as an output, but it's not changed by the machine. But computers are thinking machines. They take an input and perform a function on it to do something else, eventually getting to the end product after performing often a lot of different operations. Binary code is not an end in itself, and actually it's not read in a straightforward one-for-one counting system. Binary numbers count upward exponentially in powers of 2 with every new digit that's added. Tally counting, like the relationship between organ barrel pins and keys and pipes, could be described as indexical. Binary counting is already not indexical at the stage where it begins to mean anything. Computers work using logical operations based on some very simple ways of completing circuits. A simple circuit can express on or off, but a series circuit can express on, off, and also both or not both. And a parallel circuit can express on, off, and also either or neither. These are physical ways of expressing components of a fundamental system called Boolean logic, where it's possible to build complex constructions from the simple operations and, or, and not. They can not just be on or not on, but they can also be on in different ways. So already at the outset there are more than 2 basic states, and they're layered and inverted to create logical systems that are exponentially more complex than something which is simply binary. But this is all a bit conceptual, so let's go back to things that are relevant for musical results. Digitally automated music, especially earlier stuff where the technology didn't get so close to imitating acoustic and analog electric sounds, gets this reputation of being kind of rigid or unexpressive or bleepy. Part of this is about the fact that it has this restoring logic and just produces a straight tone with none of the organic, wavy stuff that people sometimes quite like in music. This is similar to a barrel organ in that, although it's less consistent, in theory it produces every note in the same way. However, in a hand-cranked barrel organ or music box, there's also a very strong analog component with the fact that the progress of the music is controlled by the manual turning of a handle by a person who is not a robot. People don't necessarily always like a transparently digital sound, although stuff like 8-bit music has a kind of retro appeal by this point. Lots of the continuous control features of modern technology in terms of MIDI seem geared towards making things sound more organic and less robotic. Some people say that the manual turning of the barrel organ handle could allow you to be a little bit expressive with the timing, but others say you just have to do it as regularly as possible. And in the 19th century, people were telling all kinds of derogatory jokes about barrel organ players doing the tempo wrong. In other cases, analog aspects of musical technologies are seen not just as opportunities to get things wrong, but as opportunities to vary things in an individual and expressive way, like vibrato, portamento, and other variations in delivery. But in the case of the street barrel organ, a lot of the time the attention they got suggested that people thought they were really basic or inferior, both in terms of their analog capacities, like variability of tempo, and their digital ones, like non-variability of articulation or dynamics. So what's going on here? Can we relate all this to the idea that the concept of digital, in relation to automated programmed music, has some kind of associations that go beyond a literal description of how it technically works? Maybe it has some social meanings, or at least associations. We can actually see some of the cultural values we attach to work reflected in the ways that different kinds of music technologies have been talked about. Let's consider the social construction of the early Moog analog synthesizer. This instrument doesn't need to be played with a piano-style keyboard, but as you can see on the left, this became a common part of its standard setup. And part of the reason for this was because the keyboard has very familiar social meanings in a musical context, so it helped people to understand and categorise what this instrument was about and what it meant to play it. Hand-cranked mechanical instruments like the one on the right were often played by people who were poor and/or disabled and not able to do other types of work. And busking in the street with an organ like this would exempt you from the criminalisation of begging. There are many self-playing mechanical instruments that don't require a handle, but perhaps there's a similar social meaning to this feature. If someone has been exempted from laws against vagrancy because they're working at producing music, a work-valuing society would probably attach some meaning to the visible performance of labour that turning the handle allows. And a discomfort at seeing people not visibly working or labouring enough in the production of creative artworks or just making music in general. It's not something which died with the 19th century. It's definitely still at play when people talk about digital music. The Canadian producer deadmau5 caused some controversy in 2012 when he accused his fellow DJs and producers of not really delivering the goods when they would play live. He said, "We all just hit play." Similarly, some Game Boy musicians have joked about the fact that when they're on stage, they just kind of hit the start button and dance around a bit. And on the 8-bit or chip music scene, there's a derogatory word for creative products that don't use the traditional hardware to create these retro sounds, but instead take a software shortcut of some kind. Fake bit. Is work for work's sake necessarily a good thing? And what about the fact that most people will never have the opportunity to work hard at becoming a virtuoso musician? One important thing that mechanical and digital automated music technologies can both do is to allow more access to music making for people who are not able to use or not confident using live instruments like a guitar or keyboard. We sometimes see vague ideas about technology having this kind of futuristic cyborg power and launching the entire human race into the future. But it can also allow one person who couldn't play a piece of music on a live instrument to make and play back a song. Whether or not this is what the original inventors of mechanical music in 9th century Baghdad were thinking about at the time, the inventions they dreamed up obviously still have a lot to offer us today.